External conflict is any conflict that takes place outside the character's mind, and internal conflict is any conflict that takes place inside the character's mind. Easy, right? We got that. Except it's not really that easy. So I'm going to dig down into the topic just a little bit more now. Okay, external conflict, like that great big polar bear threatening our poor little intrepid adventurer. So external conflict is when the character faces conflict with an outside force. It's also a situation or a person that the character reacts to, in this case, the great big polar bear. And it can be resolved without the character changing. The character can fight off the big polar bear, run away, maybe somebody else can sweep into the rescue, but the character themselves are not changed as a person. And often, the type of external conflict is genre dependent, and we'll look at that in a moment. So there are 5 types of external conflict, and this might take you back to your high school days. I'm sure we all covered this. The first one, man versus man. That's easy enough. It's the good guy versus the bad guy. It's the romantic comedy where 2 women perhaps are vying for the same man or the attention of the same man, or it's the 2 work colleagues vying for the same promotion. There's any number of examples of man versus man. The next one, man versus nature. Now you can start to see how this becomes genre dependent. Your typical disaster movies, survival against the elements, those would be your man versus nature story. Man versus society. For example, The Hunger Games, Gattaca, so there's 20 million, Logan's Run, if you go back a little bit deeper into the past. There are so many of these examples. And I want you to remember this when we come back to internal conflict, but also society is hard to represent in a novel or in a story. So usually the society is represented by a person. For example, in The Hunger Games, you've got President Snow, who represents the absolute epitome of the society that the characters are fighting against. Then we've got man versus machine. iRobot, Terminator. I actually watched Terminator 2 again late last night, so I might just land up referencing that a bit in this webinar. And then the last one, man versus supernatural or the cosmic. This would be, for example, monsters, God, religion, so paranormal movies, sometimes your thrillers where you've got an unseen enemy threat. Again, religion in the same way, similar way to, could be like society. It could fall under man versus society. Or if it's the person battling against a particular religious belief, that would be versus the supernatural or cosmic. But again, notice that it's hard to represent the supernatural, especially if it's something like God. I'm trying to remember the name of that Billy Connolly movie a few years ago where he sued God after being rejected for an insurance claim. Again, God needs to be represented unless you've actually got a physical character playing God within your story. You need a person who can represent that idea, that concept, that religion. It could be a lawyer, if it's a court case story. It could be the Pope, depending on, for example, if it's a Dan Brown type of story. So there will always be man versus man, good guy versus bad guy in the society or supernatural cosmic, unless your supernatural is, for example, a supernatural being, a superhero or a supervillain, then they represent, or they are the bad guy. But if your book is about a larger concept, if it's about society, if it's about big themes and ideas, you do need to make sure you have one character or a group of characters that represents the evil. Another example is in the Twilight movies, the later Twilight movies. There are the group of vampires from Italy who represent a certain way of life, because a way of life in itself can't be fought against. Right, so that's external conflict. That's easy enough. As I say, you probably touched upon all of those back in high school English class way back when, or literature class, in whatever language you studied. But There is one element, one conflict that will be in every single good, gripping story you have ever encountered, and that is internal conflict. So we've got a man standing here at a crossroads. He's got a maybe bad route one way and a potentially worse route the other, and which one does he take? And this brings us to man versus self. No matter how good your story is, no matter how good Terminator 2 is as a movie with its special effects, and it's, it was, at the time, it was groundbreaking for the effects and the graphics. But what really made that movie something special was that it featured characters fighting against their own inner demons. So when we fight ourselves, where that conflict comes from is who we are as people, our past experiences, the sum of what has made us who we are today. It can also involve things like jealousy, guilt, fear, our beliefs, and our choice between right and wrong. This is where, and I touched on this when I did the character arcs webinar, your character needs to have a flaw, a false belief, or a wound. And by having one of those, that gives them the internal conflict that needs to then relate to or react to the external. So, for example, going back to Terminator 2, you've got the Terminator who arrives to protect young John Connor. John Connor himself has issues with the way he was raised with his mother. He believes in the beginning of the story that his mother is crazy because she has said all his life that he is in danger and that somebody's out to kill him, and that he needs to be raised in a certain way so that he is strong enough to protect himself. And she obviously has her own issues. When the Terminator arrives, having met him once before, she is convinced that the Terminator is going to kill her and her son. So she has to work through those issues. Her son has to work through his issues with his mother, which are ongoing throughout the movie and only really get resolved towards the end. And the mother also has a further issue where she is determined to prevent the future, the really dreadful future outcome that is going to happen from happening. And she believes that the way to do that is to kill the man who is responsible for triggering the apocalypse, basically. And she has to learn along the way, and this is her character arc. So character arc and internal conflict are very closely woven together. So she needs to overcome, big spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't seen Terminator 2. She has to overcome this belief that she has to kill the man who's responsible. Together, as a team, firstly by being affected by her son and his outlook on life, she then has to find another way to prevent the future from happening that doesn't involve killing. And it's very closely tied into the way her son, John Connor, relates to the Terminator, and trying to teach the Terminator to be more human and more caring and not kill either. So notice how even though the external conflict is bad guy Terminator comes to kill little boy, mother tries to protect little boy, another Terminator from the future comes to protect, is sent back to protect little boy. That's all external. The internal is what is happening within the characters, between mother and son, within themselves about their own existing beliefs, the wounds of the past, the issues that they've been through in the past, both in their relationship and in the world around them. Right, moving on to the next. So who we are as people influences the character's emotions and how they feel. So again, this is one of those things I highly recommend you outline. And that's why I asked before the session started, how many of you are still in planning stages? Because that is the ideal place to be when you're working out your conflicts. If you know what your character's conflicts are, then as you're writing, especially if you're a pantser and you don't really plot ahead, just knowing how your character's past and their past wounds are going to affect the decisions they make, how they're going to react to situations, how they're going to feel, is going to help you as you write to stay consistent. And this is the biggie. Internal conflict can only be resolved by the character growing and changing. This is not something that can magically be fixed by another Terminator coming in to protect you from the outside. This is not something that can be fixed by somebody sweeping in at the last minute and giving the character the promotion. And if you're writing a romance, this isn't fixed by, my love interest now loves me back. It's got to be resolved within. And it's absolutely crucial in novels that are about relationships that you have, as romance novels are, that you have internal conflict. Because you cannot have relationships between people if we aren't each bringing our own baggage with us. So you need to give your characters baggage, and they need to be working on it throughout the book in order to achieve the happy outcome or the final outcome. In the same way that the Terminator cannot be destroyed, or the Terminators, both of them at the end of Terminator 2, cannot be destroyed to get rid of that technology and prevent the apocalypse from happening. That resolution only happens because of the way the characters have changed.